Hi everyone, myself Dr. M. Lakshmi Prasad, working as an associate professor in the Department of Data Science in Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. So in this video, I'm going to discuss about what are the definitions and terminologies in data management and representation subject. So very first thing is that what is the primary data? So the primary data is it is a term for the data collected at source. So this type of information can be obtained directly from first-hand sources by means of surveys, observations, and experimentation are not subjected to any processing or manipulations called primary data. So the primary data is nothing but is a term, so that is normally obtained from this source, and this kind of information can be obtained directly from the first hand of the sources. So those who are going to collect the sources directly by the person should be considered as the primary data, and it should be done by means of surveys and then observations and then experimentation and not subjected to any kind of processing or manipulation. So that kind of data will be treated as primary data. And second thing is that define administrative data. So the administrative data is the data that organizers collect about their operations. So it includes the data for routine operations, and then it is frequently used to assess how well an organization achieve its intended goals. Okay, so administrative data is nothing but is the data that is where the organizations can able to collect their operations, and it also includes data for various routines and then the frequently used to assess how an organization is achieving its intended goals. And next thing is that what is the data set? So data set is nothing but a collection of data, and in case of tabular data, the data sets correspond to one or more uh, database tables where every column of the table represents a particular variable and each row represents to the given record of the data set. So normally data set is nothing but a set of data. Normally you can able to call or can able to call it as a collection of data. So suppose if I'm going to take this tabular data, so where the data set correspond to the one or more database tables, and every column of the table represents the particular variable, and each row corresponding to the given set of the given record of the data set. And what is an internal source of the data? So internal source of the data can be easily found within the organization, such as market record, sales record, transactions, and then customer data, accounting resources. So these are some of the examples of this internal sources of the data. So the internal source of the data can be obtained or found within the organization, such as market records, examples like sales record, transactions. And then the cost and time consuming also less obtained in obtaining this internal sources. And what is an external source data? So external source data cannot be found at internal organizations and can be gained through external third-party services. Is nothing but the external source data, and then the cost and time consuming also more because it contains a huge amount of data. So examples of this external source of data will be government publications or news publications and registers of General of India and the Planning Commission and International Labour Bureau, syndicate services, and other non-government mental publications. So these are examples of this external source of the data. So the data which cannot be obtained from the internal organization and can be gained through the third party services, that should be treated as the external source of the data here. And the time and cost of the consumption is more because this is able to contain huge amount of this data. And some of the examples of this external source will be government publications, newspaper publications, and then syndicate services and other non-governmental publications. And what is a data linking? So data linking is used to bring together information from different sources in order to create a new and richer data set. So data link is nothing but which is used to bring together information from different sources in order to create a new and richer data sets. Normally, this data linking involves identifying and combining information from corresponding records on each of the different source data sets. Okay, so the rich data linking involves identifying and combining information from corresponding records on each of the different source data sets. And next one, so what is the primary source? So primary source is nothing but here the data is going to be obtained by investigator himself. So this is the first hand information. So that is nothing but the primary source. So the definition is that what is a primary source. So the primary source is the source where the data is going to be obtained directly by the investigator himself, and this one is also known as first-hand information. So normally the advantages of this primary source data will be precise information, and then reliable, and then time-consuming and expensive. And then the primary data can be obtained using that personal and then oral health examination and through the questionnaire method. So these are the some of the ways where you can able to extract the primary data. So, okay, so the primary source advantages will be precise and information and reliable, and disadvantages is that time consuming and expensive. And the primary data can be obtained by using that personal oral health examination and then questionnaire method. And next thing is that secondary source. So what is the secondary source? What is the secondary source? So the secondary source is that the data already recorded and is to be utilized to serve the purpose of the objectives of the study. So that is nothing but the secondary source. So the data already recorded and is to be utilized to serve the purpose of the objectives of the study. So example records of OPD of the dental clinics. Okay, this is one of the example of the secondary source. And next thing is that what are the data gathering techniques? So what are the data gathering techniques? So some of examples of some of the techniques like observation and questioning. So these are the two techniques that are available to gather the data. And data domains. So what are the various domains of the data? That is the question may come. And then here some of the domains will be cognitive domain, and then affective domain, and psychometric domain. So the cognitive domain means where we can able to make use of paper and pen, and affective domain means where we can able to done through interview, and then psychometric domain should be done through the observation. So these are some of the data domains. And next thing is that what are the various types of data or classification of data? That is another question that may come. So here the data is going to be classified into two types. So first one is the primary data, and second one is that secondary data. So what is primary data is the question. So the primary data is nothing but this is the data that is going to be gathered from primary source, and it also going to be gathered by persons like individual person or organized group and established practices. So these are the person where you can able to collect this primary data from the primary source here. And so some other ways means documents in their original forms, and then living organisms and man-made material things and natural object and phenomena. So these are some other categories of this primary data techniques. Okay, the question is that what is the primary data? So the primary data is the data that is going to be gathered from primary source, and who are the persons that are involved for gathering this primary data? That is that individual person can be done, or organized group and established practices, and the documents in the original forms, living organisms and man-made material things and natural objectives and phenomena. So these are some other ways of this collecting this primary data from the primary source. And what is the secondary data is the question here. Secondary data, okay, this is the data that is going to be gathered from the secondary sources, okay, and or second sources what we call. So example is that data that is going to be obtained from textbooks and then article publications like newspapers and unpublished master degree and monograph, manuscript, etc. All are should be the second-hand sources. All other the second-hand sources will be the where you can able to obtain this secondary data here. Next is that, so what are the advantages of primary data over the secondary data? So what are the advantages of the primary data over the secondary data? So the primary data frequently give the detailed definition of terms and statistical units used in the survey. So this is the very one first advantage. So the primary data give a detailed definition of the terms and statistical units used in the survey, and the secondary data has a usual little or no explanatory notes, which often arises from transcriptions of the figures from the original primary source. Okay, the secondary data has usually have little and no explanatory notes that are going to be available, which often arises from the transcriptions of the figures from the original primary source. And next thing, what kind of question that may come here is what are the advantages of the secondary data? So the advantages of secondary data is that secondary data is more convenient to use, and because they already condensed and organized one what the data we are getting, and then analysis and interpretation also done more easily, and then libraries makes the secondary data are more easily accessible. So these are the advantages. So secondary data means where the data is going to be obtained data should be more convenient, and then should be already condensed and organized, and analysis and interpretation can be done more easily as we obtain the condensed organized data, and then the libraries makes the secondary data more accessible. And next question is that, so what are respondents? This is the question that may come. So the respondents are nothing but these are the individuals who are asked or requested by the researcher to supply data or information about his research problem. Okay, so these are the conditions, or these are the persons who are going to be asked or requested by the researcher to supply the data or information about his research problem is the respondent. And next thing, what are clerical tools? So this is the question that may ask normally. So what are clerical tools? So the clerical tools are nothing but the questionnaire method, and then interview method, and then empirical observation method, and registration method, testing method, experimental method, and library method. So these are the some of the clerical tools what we call. So the questionnaire method is the one, and then interview method is the one, and then empirical observation method or registration method, and then testing method, experimental method, and then library method. So like this I can able to done with the help of these clerical tools to extract the primary or secondary data. Then what are the different mechanical devices that are available for extracting this primary and secondary data? So for that we're having some of that will be microscopes, and then thermometers, cameras, monitors, and rulers. So these are the some of the mechanical devices that are available to extract or to get the data through microscopes or thermometers or through cameras, rulers, and then monitors. And next thing is that what is the purpose of data collection is the question. So what is the purpose of data collection is the question here. So here through the main purpose is that to obtain the information, and then to keep on record, and to make decision about the important issues, and to pass information to others, and then for research study. So these are the main purposes of the data collection. So first purpose is that to obtain information. So through the data collection, what we can able to obtain the data and to keep on the record. So we can able to what the data we collected, we can able to make it record and to make decision about important issues. Suppose we're having some 1,000 lines of data, or we're having some in the form of soft copy. So among this, which are important issues according to the application or designing, so that thing we have to make, and then we have to pass this information to other individuals. And for the research study, also it should be useful. Okay, so these are the various purposes of the data collection. And next thing is that what are the various sources of the data is the question. So the sources of the data is going to be classified into tabs like external source and the internal source. So again, this external source will be divided into primary data and secondary data. So the question is that, so what are the various sources of data is the question here. So the sources of data will be classified to types like external and internal. And some other question may also come, what are the various external sources of data? So at the time, what we have to do, we have to specify this primary data and secondary data. So the primary data examples will be documents, creative works, interviews, man-made material things, and surveys. So these are some of the examples of this primary data, and secondary data will be unpublished theses, and then dissertations, manuscript, and then books, and then journals. So these are some of the different types of techniques or we can able to extract this secondary data, unpublished thesis, manuscript, books, journals. So these are all second-hand sources, right? So all this will comes under the use for secondary data. And let me compare that. What is the question is, what are the differences between internal and external sources of the data? So the internal and external sources of the data differences, what they're going to ask should be is many institutions and departments have information about their regular functions and for their own purpose, whereas the information what we collected from outside agencies should be the external sources of the data. Okay, so the main difference is that many institutions and departments have information already, so about the regular function for their own internal purpose should be the internal source. When it comes to external source, so the information what we collected from outside agencies is nothing but external source of the data. So these are the information that is going to be used in any survey. That thing able to called as internal source of the data, and this type of data are either primary or it may be a secondary. So primary external source or external secondary source. And so example is the social welfare society is the example of this internal source data, and this type of information can be collected by census or sampling method by conducting the surveys. So these are some of the differences that may ask between internal and external source of the data. And next thing is the primary data. So the data, what is the primary data is the question normally they are going to ask. So the data collected by an investigator from personal experimental studies for a specific research goal is called the primary data. So the data collected by an investigator from personal experimental studies for a specific research goal is called the primary data. So the data collected specially for a research project, and it is going to be used when the secondary data are available and inappropriate, and the data are got to be unique, original, reliable, and accurate in nature, and the primary data does not have been changed or altered by human beings. Therefore, the validity is greater than the secondary data. Right. So, what is the primary data? So, the primary data is nothing but this is the data collected by investigator from personal experimental studies for a specific research goal, and the data collected is mainly useful for the research product, and then it is going to be used when secondary data is unavailable and inappropriate, and the data is going to be unique, original, reliable, and accurate in nature. And the question is that what are the advantages and disadvantages So what are the advantages and disadvantages, or what are the merits and demerits of the primary data? So right, so when it comes to merits, so some of the advantages will be the target issues are going to be addressed here, and data interpretation is good, high accuracy of the data, and address specific research issues, and then greater control. And then here demerits will be evaluated cost, and then time consuming process, and more number of resources are required, inaccurate feedback, and then require a lot of skill with the labor. So these are the disadvantages. So the merits is that targeted issues are going to be addressed, and data interpretation is good, high accuracy of the data, and address specific research issues, and greater control. When it comes to demerits, so the cost is going to be more, and time consuming also more, and then more number of resources are going to be required, and feedback also be inaccurate, and also require a lot of skills of labor. And next question that may come here is name some primary data collection techniques. So for that, what we are having is so interview. So the interview that may be direct one or indirect one, and schedule, and questionnaire survey, and then focus group discussion, community forums and public hearings, observation, case studies, key information interview, and then internet, email, and then SMS. So these are some of the techniques that are available for collecting the primary data. So the primary data collection techniques will be interview, schedule, questionnaire survey, and then community forums and public hearings, and then observation, case studies, key information interviews, internet, email, and then SMS. And next one is the secondary data. So secondary, what is the secondary data? I can able to define here is secondary data is those data which have been already collected and going to be analyzed by some earlier agencies for its own use, and later the same are going to be used by the different agency. Okay, so the secondary data are those data which is already collected or analyzed by some earlier agencies, and that one is going to be used, and then by the same data that is going to be used by different agencies should be the example of this secondary data. Suppose this secondary data is going to be classified two types of sources. So from published sources and unpublished sources. So the published sources is going to be get from newspaper, whereas unpublished sources is going to be get from conducting interviews or surveying the existing newspapers. And next thing is that what are the published sources? How to answer. So what are the published sources? So various governmental and international local agencies publish statistical data, and chief among them or so international publications. So international publications is nothing but they are UNO, WHO, Nature, etc. And official publications of the government, that should be Department of Drug Administration and Central Bureau of Statistics, and semi-official publications like semi-government institutions like municipal corporation and then district board, etc., and all are the published reports. So the published sources are nothing but international publications, and there may be official publications and semi-official publications. So internal publications are nothing but the publications are going to be done by UNO and WHO, whereas the official publications of the government means the Department of Drug Administration or Central Bureau of Investigation, like that. And semi-official publications like semi-government instructions like municipal corporation, district board, like that. So these are the unpublished published sources. And next question is that what are the differences between the primary data and secondary data? Define the differentiate the primary data and secondary data. That is what you have to write here is. So primary data, if I take it is real-time data and sure about the sources of the data. And when it comes to secondary data, it is the past data and not sure about the sources of the data. If I take primary data, it helps to give results and findings, but here it is going to be refine the problem, and then cost and time consuming process, but it is cheap and no time consuming process. So avoid biasness of the response times and cannot know about data business or not, and then it should be more flexible and it should be less flexible. So these are some of the disadvantages between the primary data over the secondary data. Okay, so the primary data will be the real-time data, whereas this should be past data, and it is sure about the source of the data, but it is not sure about the source of the data. And it is going to be help to give results and finding, but here it is you have to refine the problem, and then time cost and time consuming process also, but it is cheap and no time consuming process. Our biasness and response time more flexible and cannot know how the data is biased, and then it should be less flexible. Next, what type of question that may come is what is the data processing? So data processing means what? So data processing is nothing but uh, innovation, data management, production, and research. This should be in cyclic process. Okay. So data processing means, so initially the data is going to be done or processed by innovation, and that data what we obtain, that is going to be managed and make it as production, and finally publish the result. That should be the data processing here. So for implementing this data processing, so what we have to do is, so after the collecting the data, we have to be prepared for the analysis, and the collected data is raw and must undergo some process before analysis, and the result of the analysis is going to be affected by lot of the form of the data. So proper data processing is must to get the reliable result. Okay, so data processing means the data is going to be processed after only the collection has been done, which is going to be get from analysis, and the collected data what we obtain should undergo some process before analysis, and the result of analysis is going to be affected by lot of the form of the data. Okay, and data processing time is get more reliable. And next question, what we are getting is was what are the objectives of data processing? So first thing is that checking the questionnaire, and then schedules, and then reduction of mass data to manage proportion, and sum up of the materials as to prepare tables, charts, graphs, and various groupings and breakdown for presenting the result, and minimize the errors which may creep at various stage of the survey here. Okay, so what are the objectives of data processing? So here it is checking the questionnaires and schedules, and then reduction of mass storage to manage the proportion, and sum up of the material so as to prepare the tables, charts, graphs, and various groupings, breakdown for presenting the result, and minimize the error which may be creep in various stages of the survey. And next question is that what are the different types of data processing? So first thing is the manual data processing. So manual data processing means which involves human intervention, and which is going to be implied by many chance for errors such as delay in data capture and high amount of operator mistakes, and then it also implies high level expenses in regards to spending for equipment and supplies and rent. Okay, in regarding spending for equipment and supplies, rent, etc. So next thing is that what are the important steps to perform data processing is the question. Next one. So first thing is that questionnaire checking is the first step where you can able to done, and second one is that editing is going to be done, and third one is that coding is to be done, and fourth one is classification, fifth one is tabulation, and sixth one is graphical representation, data cleaning, and then data adjusting. Okay, so these are the some of the steps what we have to perform in data processing. So first thing is that questionnaire, and then editing have to be done. After editing, coding is to be done, and then after that classification is to be done, Once this classification is done, then you have to move to the tabulation and then graphical representation, data cleaning, and data adjusting. So these are the steps what we have to perform in the data processing here. Next, so what is data cleaning? So otherwise, what are the steps to be performed in data cleaning is the question here. Okay, so that's for that. The data cleaning includes missing data, normality has to be done, and then linearity is to be done, outliers is to be done, multicollinearity is to be done, and then homoscedasticity is to be done. So these are the steps what are going to be performed in the data cleaning. So the data cleaning includes missing data. So what the data is missing is to be identified. Normality, linearity, outliers, and multicollinearity, and then homoscedasticity, like this. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.